What's the most weird or worst thing you've seen at a wedding? At the reception, a guest looked at my cousin's wife and said very loudly, "Who brought the whore?" And no, they didn't know her. Comment: outdoor summer wedding in TX. The groom's 90-plus-year-old grandmother died during the reception. They found out when she couldn't be roused for family pictures. Story 1. Outdoor wedding. Bride gently fed wedding cake to her new husband. Groom shoved cake at his new bride's face so hard that it broke one of her teeth. He kept pushing her until she tripped and fell over backwards. She broke her wrist when she tried to stop the fall. There was blood dripping from her mouth. The groom's father then began to beat the living shit out of his own son. Good times. Edit. For those inquiring if the couple is still married, we were staying overnight at the small bed and breakfast at which the wedding took place. The mother of the bride invited us and some other hotel guests to the wedding and reception. We have no idea what happened after that day. Story 2. Oh God! My boyfriend's oldest brother's wedding. One of his mates got plastered, lost control of his bowels, and shat himself. In a kilt. Picture the scene. On a dance floor at a working man's club in Glasgow, a drunken 40-something standing by himself in an ever-expanding circle of people looking at him in horror, whilst an equally expanding puddle of shit gathers on the floor, on his calves, on his shoes. Yeah, edit to add. My boyfriend remembered something which I had totally forgotten. When the shit began to hit the floor, the groom looked over, saw what was happening and shouted, "For f***'s sake, Mick, get to the f***ing toilet." The drunken shitter wailed back, "Can't he move? It's coming out too fast." The boyfriend compared it to watching a cow laying out a cow pat. Yeah. Story 3. I used to be a wedding registrar. I conducted one wedding, where the bride's father had passed away the year before. The ceremony was held outside in a venue's walled garden. Upon entering the garden to take their seats, the guests were met by a skeleton, which was dressed up in the father of the bride's clothes, and asked to shake his hand. Story 4. It was an overcast day. Had rained earlier, but weather was clearing up. Bride and groom went to take some photos after the ceremony. A kid, probably 6 or 7, unsupervised, ran up to a puddle the bride was carefully walking past and jumped in it. Her dress had mud splatter all the way up to her shoulder. I felt so bad for her. Story 5. I told this story in a different thread the other day, but I feel like it also applies here. A friend of mine caused some drama at her own wedding because she wasn't drinking champagne. A bunch of the older ladies on her side of the family noticed and decided the only possible explanation was that she was hiding a pregnancy. They started pointing it out to anyone who would listen, even going so far as to say they see a little bump under her dress. I guess these family members weren't close enough to the couple to know 2 very important details. 1. The bride is a recovering alcoholic. She doesn't drink, ever, not even at her own wedding. 2. The bride and groom had been trying to get pregnant for probably 2 years at that point, and were starting to be resigned to the fact they wouldn't be able to have kids. This was eventually confirmed, but they did not know this at that time. Story 6. At the after-party, the groom spent the whole night watching a basketball game on TV at the bar. Couldn't even be bothered to turn around and say hi to any of the guests. Just sat there at the bar, eyes fixed to the TV the whole time. When it was time for him to make a speech, he just said, "You know, this was supposed to be a special day, but my team lost, so I f***ing hate it. F*** all of you. This sucks." Needless to say, that marriage lasted all of a week or 2. Story 7. The bride's grandfather died while she was walking down the aisle. The ambulance was there in less than 5 minutes, but the paramedics called it after resuscitation failed. They removed the body, and after a brief period of consultation and people pulling themselves together, the wedding ceremony went ahead. No exaggeration. The time between Granddad hitting the floor and the ceremony restarting was less than 45 minutes. I didn't attend the reception, but I heard from others that it was a rager. Story 8. Went to a wedding where everything went well. Got to the reception, and the alcohol was flowing. My husband and I drank and got on the dance floor. The groom's side were very proper, while the bride's side were quite the opposite. Everyone is dancing when all of a sudden the cousin of the bride grabs the mic and says, "This song is dedicated to your wedding night." He motions for everyone to clear the dance floor and cues the DJ. Madonna's Justify My Love starts playing as the cousin starts crawling and rolling on the floor while lip-syncing. It was easily the most awkward moment while everyone stood there watching his overly sexual performance. The song finally ends, and it's dead silence. I will never forget this moment. Story 9. My youngest sister's wedding. One of my sister's friends was wearing quite a short summer dress. She spent the evening sitting in a manner that let it be known that she wasn't wearing any underwear. She waited till someone looked in her direction, pulled up her dress and spread her legs. Very disturbing, especially given the number of children running around. Story 10. Pales in comparison, but a total white trash wedding. By the time the bride and groom got from the church to the reception, 30 Mhaman, the entire wedding party was obliterated drunk. Each of the wedding party was introduced and were varying degrees of undress. Ties missing, jackets gone, dresses hiked up, barefoot, etc. The B&G were introduced and came walking in. The groom was wearing a bow tie, boxers and dress shoes carrying a whiskey bottle. The bride was wearing what I determined were either white panties or a bikini bottom, a white sheer cami, and appeared to be braless under. Her veil and cowboy boots carrying a natural light case of beer. Their parents were given the beer and whiskey and proceeded to start drinking. About the time I left with my GF at the time, her co-worker. The bride was dancing with her friends wearing nothing but her new husband's long tux coat, and it often did not cover anything as she kept it unbuttoned. The best man was feeling her up. Her bridesmaids were wearing their dates' shirts or coats in their bras and panties while grinding on their obviously turned-on dates. The groom was legit passed out under a table. Story 11. My Sil told us about a wedding she was at where the bride and the groom's mother did not get along. The groom was a workmate of my Sil's husband, and all the work friends knew there was some tension between the two, but did not expect anything to happen. The ceremony went off okay. Groom's mother gave a few killing looks, but nothing was said. At the reception, she started drinking and making comments to her relatives and friends, loud enough for other people and the bride to hear. The groom spoke to her, and she quietened down. During the toasts, she made loud noises every time the bride's name was said, but she was mostly ignored. She kept drinking and moving around, talking to different people, while the dancing was on. She was sitting at a different table when the bridesmaids brought around pieces of the wedding cake. She told them she didn't want any. Bridesmaids said she would just leave some on the table for the people who were sitting there, and put some on the table. Groom's mother shouted, "I told you I don't want any fucking wedding cake," and with that, swept the pieces of cake off the table with the back of her hand. Cake landed on the chief bridesmaid, who shouted back. Groom's mother jumps up, slaps the bridesmaid, and then other people joined, defending their chosen side. My Sile had seen this all happen and was eagerly watching from the sidelines. The groom and his best man stopped the music, stopped the brawling, and split everyone up. He said, "That's it. Wedding's over. Thank you all for coming. And Mum, I never want to see you again," grabbed the bride by the hand, and walked out. My Sil's husband decided it was time for them to leave in case things kicked off again. Story 12. Less what I saw, and more what I didn't see. The priest forgot to actually marry them. He did the whole ceremony, including a part where he gifted the couple an invisible shovel they could use to dig their way out of problems, and a part where he actually gifted them a painting of people picking potatoes, but accidentally skipped the vows section. He had to get the couple back together after they got back from their honeymoon to perform that section by itself, so that the union could be recognized by the church. Story 13. Late to the party, but this has to be shared. Bride used old film strips from movie edits, cast-offs for decor in the table centerpieces. Flowers and film strips at a quirky fun wedding. Looked great, right? She had picked up the box for free and didn't really look at it. Some of the strips were from schlocky sci-fi nonsense. Most of them were porn. Story 14. Bride was a member of the Catholic Church choir who drunkenly accidentally got pregnant with an old friend from college. The priest took the opportunity at their wedding to preach instead of a homily, a eulogy to fallen moral values and the end of the most magnificent innocence. Then the open bar was changed to cash bar after half an hour, which was too late to start the small riot that was brewing. One of the groomsmen wrote "baby on board" underneath the "just married" on the couple's car, which led to him getting a punch from the bride's uncle and then a drunken cousin decided the best way to deal with the message was to kick the rear window in, which restarted the riot. Couple later divorced and split the kids up by gender. He took the boys and she took the girl. Edit. Made it clear she was marrying the friend who got her pregnant by adding, at their wedding. Story 15. Husband and I used to play in a Sealith band, and we played for many weddings. At one truly memorable one, the bride and groom were already very drunk when we arrived to set up, and they pretty much disappeared for the evening. Their two families sat on opposite sides of the marquee with their backs to each other all night, and nobody from one side spoke to the other. Not a soul danced all evening. So we just played our music amongst ourselves. Goodness knows what the history was between them. At the end of the night, the best man tried to leave without paying us, so our dance caller had to chase him across a field in the dark to get our fee off him. I've often wondered how long that marriage lasted. Story 16. All at the same wedding. Groom doesn't show up until an hour late. Tux does not fit him at all. Bride and groom's toddler son was allowed to play with a toy truck during ceremony, around the feet of the bridal party. At one point, lifts the toy truck and slams it into the shin of one of the bridesmaids, drawing blood and interrupting the proceedings for a good 10 minutes. Not to be outdone, the groom is starting to look unwell. He passes out, falling down a small set of stairs. Upon regaining consciousness, he runs out of the small church out the back. 10 minutes goes by, then 20. He returns with his tux shirt pulled out, unbuttoned, and wide open, bearing chest hair and a gut. He returns to the bride, and they finish the ceremony with him like that. Story 17. The vegetarian option being a bowl of chips. A toddler getting kicked over by a man having a tantrum about a football score. The bride being left with her 2-month-old baby screaming whilst her husband was blackout drunk. A groomsman having to be pulled away from a bridesmaid's hotel door after he somehow it into his head that she owed him sex. He sat outside her door harassing her for hours until she had to call the groom for help. Creep. Story 18. Wedding of a guy I worked with. At the reception, a friend of the groom decided this was the time he wanted to pronounce his love for his friend's new bride by saying he wanted to eat her pussy. Fight breaks out, groom and friend go to jail. This wasn't some trailer park wedding. Everyone involved are engineers and we all work together. Story 19. I'll qualify this by saying I left the wedding early. I have neuro issues that respond very poorly to me being overheated, and I didn't feel great, so I slipped out quietly right at the start of the reception and caught an Uber back to my hotel. If you're wondering how many people dropped from the heat and had to be carted away in ambulances before they finally just called the reception a wrap, Four downed family members, later from heat stroke, heat, exhaustion, before they were finally like, yeah, this outdoor reception and surprise 105-degree TX spring day aren't making a good combination. It was like 90 minutes after I left when I saw a bunch of people from the wedding coming back. The path to some of the rooms took them right by the pool that I was in. Pool was actually pretty cool still. At first, people were like, people are in the hospital and you're here having a good time, being all pissy about it. But then I'd just be like, AC in my room isn't keeping up, and the pool is the only place I can stay cool. About an hour later, there were like 30 people from the wedding in the pool. I felt really bad for the bride and groom, because I guess they paid a small fortune, several $1,000s for catering, and there was absolutely nobody there for dinner. Fortunately, the bride had a good head on her shoulders and had the caterers take all of it to a local homeless shelter with attached soup kitchen. Story 20. I went to an outdoor wedding with a bunch of cans of seltzer and beer available as soon as you showed up. I chilled with my friends, sipping on cans until people started sitting down. We took our seats, but kept chatting and drinking as everyone filled in and waited for the ceremony to start. We realized about 3 minutes in that it had started, just not loud enough to cut through the chatter, and the videographer had been filming the crowd, while my group, the groom's friends OFC, had been openly drinking our Bud Light cans. I felt so immediately trashy. Later, there was a massive argument between the bride and her parents that seemed to be centered around a lack of decorum and Jesus at the event. The groom also spent most of reception complaining to us about the prices of wedding stuff, with detailed price breakdowns included in the complaints. Story 21. My friend's wedding. His mother had a lot of mental health and addiction issues, and he was already iffy on inviting her. But his beautiful, kind bride didn't want him to ever have any regrets about not having his mother there. She showed up 25 minutes late. They had announced not to get in the way of photographers during the ceremony and to try to not have your phone out in the way. Well, she pulled out the biggest goddamn iPad I've ever seen in my life and blocked a videographer for a while. Then when they got to the part of the ceremony where they were going to do the sand thing, where you combine the two things of sand in a jar, she got up pulling a giant Ziploc bag of rice from her way too huge purse and just baseball pitched it right into everyone's face. I'm talking hard. Shrapnel. His sister looked just about ready to actually murder her. Bride and groom both disassociated and left their bodies, and everybody else gasped audibly. Finally, another family member got up and very quickly ushered her away. Everyone was slipping and sliding on the way back down the aisle because there was so much rice all over the ground. We laugh now, but it was the most batshit crazy thing I've ever seen at a formal event. Story 22. My friend's wedding was officiated by her childhood pastor, who went off script and delivered a tangent about how the first marriage is the only legitimate marriage, and his church doesn't believe in divorce or second marriages. The groom's dad has been married 3 times, and all 3 wives, mom, stepmom Ferber 1, stepmom Ferber 2, were sitting in the front row. The pastor had met them all at the rehearsal the previous day. Story 23. White trash wedding. The bride, 3 kids with 3 dudes, had her sister, 4 kids, 4 dudes, as maid of honor. During the part of "I will always be faithful," the sister said "liar" loud enough for all 14 people in attendance to hear. The groom later passed out in his truck during the wedding, and a bridesmaid climbed on top and straddled him. The bride pulled her out by her hair and had a fist fight where blood was spilled. The DJL left early, so someone drove their truck into the tent. Outdoor wedding with a tent for reception with plywood on the ground to keep the music going. A full-in cake fight broke out where the whole cake was destroyed. Story 24. Second marriage. The bride wants her toddler son to give her away. The minister asks the kid if he agrees to give her hand in marriage, blah blah blah. The kid adamantly shouts, "No," and runs away crying. "I'm sorry, you said worst." This was absolutely the best thing I've seen at a wedding. Spoiler alert, she cheated on him the same way she cheated on her first husband with him. Story 25. Back in the 90s. Wedding with 2 big Irish families. I was in the band. During the cake cutting, the groom grabs the bride's head and slams her face in the plate of cake. It's never cute or funny, but this was hard and mean. She's ruined and crying. Her father's walks up and cold cocks the groom. 1 punch knockout. The groom's father charges a starts fighting with the bride's father. Then it is on. The whole place erupted. They sort of sat each family on opposite sides of the dance floor, and within seconds, there were 50 people beating the hell out of each other on the dance floor. I saw a middle-aged woman in a formal dress jump on a man's back and choke him to the ground. There was extreme violence for about 3 to 5 minutes. It seemed much longer. Then it just stopped and everyone went back to their tables and started eating dessert. No shit. 5 minutes later, we played the electric slide and the dance floor was full. Story 26. Wedding in upstate Georgia. During the vows, the groom was so nervous he threw up, and I mean projectile puke, all over his bride, the maid of honor, and the preacher. They still laugh about it to this day, but at the time, it was pretty bad. It was my wife's niece. She handled it with grace. We have it on tape, and we pull it out at their anniversary party yearly. Good times? Story 27. I caught the bouquet. I was 13 at my 17-year-old cousin's wedding. His bride was 16 years old and 5 months pregnant. They were all, "Oh, you're next." Seriously, I was mortified. My parents had to take me home. I thought I was cursed or something. I worried until a friend of theirs, who was also trying to catch the bouquet, married a few months later. When I married at 24, a groomsman puked all down my bridesmaid's back before the wedding. Story 28. Bride's dad got up to announce and congratulated the maid of honor of her engagement. The maid of honor had not been purposed to yet, and the dad ruined the surprise. The same guy, my husband's uncle, also got so drunk at our wedding that he got up and congratulated me and my brother-in-law on our nuptials. Story 29. I doubt anyone will see this so far down, but at my own wedding, one of the groomsman's girlfriends, very tumultuous and fairly brief relationship with cheating on both sides, pulled a chair onto the dance floor and started to give another male guest a lap dance while virtually no one else was even on the dance floor. Before I could even intervene, my maid of honor's boyfriend turned it into a joke and acted like he was going to give the male a lap dance. Broke up the messiness and made folks laugh, but holy shit, who the f*** does that? Story 30. Retired minister here. I officiated a wedding for an older couple. Second marriage for both. Halfway through the service, the groom passes out. We drag him to the first pew, put a cold compress on his head. He starts to regain consciousness. We get him some water. The bride turns to me and says, he's done that at every wedding he's been to since his divorce. Well, duh. Might you have mentioned that earlier? We finished the service with him seated on the first pew. Story 31. One of my older cousin's weddings, about midway through the reception, a small group of crashers made their way in. They managed to score a few drinks and then were asked to leave by someone. I'll call him the leader, decided to get mouthy, like over the music loud, about not leaving because f*** someone or something. Well, the best man went over and just picked him up and carried him out the exit. The best man was, and still to this day, one of the biggest MFers I have ever seen, like 6'10", and pushing 350 of corn-fed farm boy. Needless to say, the crashers followed very quietly behind him. Funny as all hell. Story 32. The bride and groom wanted End of the Road by Boys II Men for their first dance song. I guess because it was 1992, and that song was everywhere. Even in white as rice Hertfordshire, where the wedding was. But have you heard the lyrics to that song? How could you love me and leave me and never say goodbye? I just break down and cry. Pain in my head. Oh, I'd rather be dead. Maybe I'll forgive you. They lasted 2 years. She was a wallflower and he would f*** anything with a pair of tits. A group of us were just looking at each other like the awkward look monkey puppet meme. Story 33. Not that bad, but was at a wedding. And the bride's relatives that she never met from South America. Her mother had invited them as a surprise, sang several songs to the bridal party. They sang very badly, and the performance lasted about 20 minutes. It was very awkward as they had just started to serve food, so everyone had to pause and watch. Story 34. Bride's cousin wore a Canadian tuxedo, got belligerently drunk, started fucking with hotel staff, and the cops showed up and had to hit him with the taser and arrest him. Before all of this, he was telling me how he'll often collect roadkill if it's not too far gone, because some of that roadkill is good eatin'. Story 35. At the reception on Sat, bride and groom got super drunk. Cake cutting time. Bride put just a little cake on groom's nose in a playfully manner. Groom somehow didn't register this as playful or even expected, took a fistful of cake in one hand, with the other hand, he took the back of the bride's head and smashed the fist full of cake into her face and ground it in, then laughed like it was funny. Totally the opposite. Gasps from the attendees. Then silence. Wrecked her makeup, dress, and drew blood. We all knew he was a dumbass. She finally saw it. We were lucky she didn't pick up the cake knife and go after him. Reception stopped. No honeymoon. She contacted a divorce lawyer, Monday Am. Yep, they were divorced soon thereafter. But to this day, she continues to be a dumbass as well. Story 36. Former limo driver here. Story time. It was early 2000s. Lakeway Inn, which is or was at the time, a very pricey resort. I'm hired along with 2 other drivers to chauffeur the bride's party, and the groom's party are being chauffeured by my colleague. Everything is smooth on the way in. We pick up a big Spanish family. Everyone is drinking casually, and my limo bar glassware is being used along with the ice I provided. We take the guests to the wedding. Nice affair. We see there's a band performing. Think Gypsy Kings style of music. Within 2 hours, everything is over, and we're supposed to carry them to a reception back in Lakeway. I have the bride and groom in my limo, driving on the road. along with the bride's mother and the groom's mother and other assorted family. I don't speak much Spanish, but all of the sudden "chinga tu madre" was said very loudly, followed by other loud screaming and then a sound of a very expensive wine glass being broken, which is when I pulled over the limo and proceeded to yell furiously at this wedding party for being possibly violent, drunken assholes, letting them know that Noon was getting stabbed in my car. Apparently, he grabbed a bridesmaid's ass or something repulsive during the ceremony, causing mass chaos. So after we sat on the side of the road for a brief minute and I collected all of the glassware, I proceeded to take them back to the hotel. Once we get there, the groom tries to stiff me for the ride, and I remind him how prepaying works, and that I'm not going to be mad that he hasn't tipped me yet either. The bride's family tells him a thing or two, so he leaves in his Porsche 911 speeding down the road. I knew this wasn't going to end well for him, because Lakeway is notorious for speeding enforcement. Sure enough, a few minutes later, on my way out, I pass by a Spanish gentleman being arrested for speeding on the side of the road by 2 Lakeway cops. I would have warned him about these cops had he tipped me, but alas, I would brag that I saved someone from being stabbed that night. But really, I just didn't want to clean up any mess in that clean limo. My boss would have killed me. Story 37. I used to work in a hotel conference center, so I saw a lot of weddings. One, the groom and best man got into a fist fight before the meal was even served. We never got told what exactly went down, but we did know from the catering staff that the groom had a bloody nose and got it all over the bride's dress, and she spent the rest of the night like that. And groom and best man made up not long after and party went on. Had a bride pass out in the bathroom. Co-worker found her and roused her. She started sobbing that she didn't love the groom and only married him because she was tired of being single. A wedding outside in November. In Canada, a bride walking from her room to the wedding hall with her dad and her dad lecturing her about how it was her 4th wedding and he wasn't going to pay for any more, so this one better stick. Story 38. I was a groomsman at my friend's wedding. At the reception afterwards, after everyone was jolly drunk, I happened into the bathroom and found the groom's college roommate and some random guest in a loud argument. Lots of "you don't know me" being thrown around. I didn't give a f***. I went into a stall, and when I came out, they were locked into an embrace and rolling around on the floor, wrestling and screaming. I went right in to try to break it up and got pushed back. So I went into the main hall and tried to find the groom's brother to help me out. Finally found him. The random guest was now in the lobby and fighting another random guest while a bunch of people were gathered around. Brother ran into the fray and I thought, shit, I'm going to need more, so I grabbed the groom. By the time we got to the fight, it had moved outside and there was a big crowd now. Same guy was fighting, seemingly everyone, and everyone was hurling insults. I saw the guy's girlfriend run off to her car. Groom and I went in to break everything up and there ended up being a mosh pit. Another groomsman's wife got hit in the throat by a can of beer, causing the groomsman to fly into a rage. I ended up having to hold him back. Eventually, the guy's girlfriend drove over and dragged him into the car. She started driving off and that could have been the end of it. But nope, some idiot had to throw out a racial slur. Guy opened the door on the moving car and rolled out and went right back into the crowd. It only ended when the groom's brother and another guy dragged the instigator out to his girlfriend's car, and he only got in because there were sirens approaching. This guy fought damn near the entire wedding on his own. Story 39. About 15 years ago, I was at a wedding at Middlehead in Sydney, Australia. It was a fantastic location overlooking the entrance to Sydney Harbour. There had been storms on and off all day, but the rain disappeared for the ceremony. You could see the storm clouds out to sea, but it was sunny right where we were. The ceremony was like any standard ceremony. Compete with that bit where the celebrant asks, "If anyone has any reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever. Hold your peace." As soon as the celebrant did the pause after asking the question, there was an almighty boom of thunder, by far the loudest we'd heard all day. Everyone laughed about how God apparently didn't approve, but the ceremony continued and they were married. Anyway, they divorced less than 12 months later after she ran off with her football coach. Story 40. My niece was having a morning beach wedding, followed by a reception on the roof of the hotel most of us were staying. About 40 guests total. It turned out she'd done no planning at all besides thinking, gee, I'd like to get married on the beach, and renting chairs and a little bower gazebo. No permit, no idea how to get elderly guests over the 100 yards of sand, all of that. We all get there and have to schlep the chairs down to the water, set up the damn gazebo, and pay off the lifeguards not to rat us out. The bride arrives late and her car gets stuck in the sand, so 2 groomsmen carry her down. The only thing that saved the reception is that my sister, the bride's aunt, is a genius, and figured that if the ceremony was that much of a shit show, the reception might also be. She snuck off and called the hotel, discovering that the bride had indeed reserved the roof, but not made any provision for food or drink, besides one case of beer and 2 small cheese plates, for 40 people expecting lunch. Being both a genius and totally generous, she got the hotel, on no notice at all, to add a bartender, a waiter, and an open bar, and called a Chinese restaurant and begged them to make catering-sized dishes of fried rice, egg rolls, and a couple of other things, and deliver them ASAP. I had some good playlists on my iPod, that long ago, and got the bartender to hook it up to the hotel speakers. At the end of it all, and I have to admit that despite all odds it was a pretty good time, the bride's only comment was, "See? It turned out perfect." Story 41. My godmother showed up to my wedding in her wedding dress and veil. Between the ceremony and the reception, she punched her husband in the face and disappeared. Turns out she drove home, 350 miles, emptied their house of everything, and filed for divorce. She had always been a little off, but this was over the top. Story 42. My husband's aunt wore a tiara to our wedding. It was at Bolt Castle up in Alexandria Bay, which is a beautiful mansion castle on an island in the middle of a river. It was summer, and we're not the formal wear type, so the dress code was dressy casual, button-up and slacks, polo and nice jeans, whatever. My husband's aunt showed up in her wedding dress wearing a tiara. Thankfully, her wedding dress was blue and basically just an evening gown, but I've seen her wedding pictures and knew what it was. The tiara somehow ended up in the river thanks to my brother El Mao. Story 43. My cousin's a doctor with her own business in her late 30s. Officiant mentioned how wives should obey their husband 3 times during the speech taught to vows. The first time I was like, okay, they're going traditional religious here. And then he mentioned obedience again, and my eyes rolled all the way back. And then he mentioned it again, and then I was just angry at the display of old-school, women are property type of misogyny I was witnessing. Makes my skin crawl to this day just thinking about how gross those vows were. Story 44. Went to a cousin's wedding in the hills of Kentucky. Had to drive through a trailer park to get to the venue, which was honestly a nice cabin, given the location. Groom wore a kilt. Their family is German, not Scottish. Bride's dad wore a black dude rag and a wife beater. Had to look nice because he had a funeral to go to afterwards. When it came time for the vows, the groom pulls out a pocket knife and cuts his palm as the officiant starts to recite the old god's wedding vows from Game of Thrones. There is an audible gasp and a "what the f*** uttered somewhere amongst us guests, as none of us knew that would be happening. Reception was held in the same building, with no AC. The meal had many mayo-based salads and pre-mixed meat sauce spaghetti. I love telling this story. Story 45. I was a bridesmaid for my brother's wedding. His ex showed up high on X in a white mini dress dancing alone, and her boob kept falling out. This was a really fancy wedding, and the bride begged me not to drag her out, but I had security, and 3 groomsmen escort her out twice. She's lucky the bride wouldn't let me drag her out myself. She wouldn't have come back that second time. My brother still denies knowing her, but I know him better than he does. Yes, they are divorced. Story 46. My brother and his wife wanted to get married at a particular park where they live. They do a lottery system to reserve the pavilions, and for whatever reason, when her number came up, they didn't call her. When she called to check in, almost every date had been booked, so they had to take what was left, which was a Sunday in October, in Wisconsin. In case you're not familiar, Sundays in October fall on 2 very important seasons: hunting and football. My family is very, very big into both. My brother is polyamorous, so there was already some negative feelings from my conservative family, and most weren't coming. My aunt and uncle, the most conservative and churchy of them all, said they would be coming and bringing our grandma. When they got to the pavilion, my uncle walked in carrying a big box. He had stopped on the way to the wedding to buy a TV and antenna so he could watch the Packer game. He set it up in the corner of the room so they could watch while paying attention to the ceremony. The officiant was very late. More on him later. So by the time that part started, the game was mostly over. Instead, my aunt and uncle stood in the corner praying for my brother and sister-in-law's souls. Out loud. They're terrible people. Funny part about the officiant, when he finally showed up, I immediately recognized him as the man I lost my virginity to. I told my husband right away, not that he cared at all, but not before my sister-in-law could tell me that she had already told the officiant I would be here and he would keep it quiet. We found out over a family dinner that she dated him after I slept with him, so we have that in common. Story 47. I drive a cab. Was hired for 4 hours to provide transportation from the reception at a rural winery to various hotels, houses in town. Got paid a fixed amount for the hours, plus tips. Usually works out pretty well, even though the hours are not what I prefer. Most guests were pleasant, tipsy, funny, but near the end of the night, 2 a.m., the wedding party came out. The bride first, being basically carried by her bridesmaids' friends. She was using her feet, but not very effectively. They set her down on a bench near my cab, and she sat with her head down near her knees while they fetched the car to take her and her newly minted husband wherever they were going. Just as the car pulled up, the groomsman came out with the groom, literally dragging him, toes down, through the pea gravel on the path and through the parking lot. I have, somewhere, a picture of the grooves in the gravel from his no longer so shiny patent leather shoes. The bridesmaids came back to get the bride as the groomsman poured the groom into the car, and when they started jostling the bride, she puked in her lap. I'm just pleased they didn't ask me to drive the happy couple. Why do people get so incredibly drunk at their own wedding? I mean, if you're going to get shit-faced at a wedding reception, do it at someone else's. Story 48. At an old friend's wedding, one of the bridesmaids got banged in the bathroom by one of the groom's friends. The husband of that bridesmaid, wondering where his wife disappeared to, caught them in the act, and as one would assume, flew off the handle, but instead of directing his anger at the intercoursing couple, decided to start kicking and punching vehicles at the venue. The venue shared a parking lot with a bar saloon, and the vehicles he started hitting belonged to patrons of that bar. Before anyone could react or say anything, a couple of dudes flew from the bar and proceeded to throw some punches. Police were called, but the only one who went to jail was the guy who caught his wife having sex with another guy. They were divorced shortly after. Funniest thing to me? I remember the guy being super stoked about the open bar when getting there. Talk about a 180 of a night. Story 49. At a friend's outdoor wedding in the summer, everyone was gathered, waiting for the ceremony to begin. The music began, and the bridal party began walking down the aisle. All went well, and then we all stood up for the bride to make her appearance and walk down the aisle. She did so, all eyes on her, except when she got to the altar. There was no groom in sight. Turned out that no one thought to notify the groom and groomsmen that the ceremony was about to begin, and they were smoking cigarettes around the corner. The bride was devastated. After several minutes of confusion, they decided to have a do-over for walking down the aisle. But it just felt weird, and you could feel the disappointment. Story 50. My dad wanted a low-key affair, so he decided to marry my stepmom in a tent set up in a field across from his house. My aunt is notoriously late for everything, so the whole 50 or so guests were watching as she and her family pulled up. Aunt was waving at us and briskly walking across the field when she stepped in a gopher hole. It was immediately apparent she snapped her ankle. An ambulance was called, towels and a glass of water fetched. She was telling us to go ahead while she waited, but the ceremony was held until she got placed in the ambulance. As the vows were getting underway, the ambulance was still idling in the background, and you can see it in the video, and quite a few pictures. Eternal memories of love and tib-fib fracture. Story 51. At my cousin's wedding, she got into a knockdown, drag-out fight with the maid of honor, who had drunkenly attacked the groom and another relative. As the bride was beating the crap out of her friend in the parking lot, kneeling on her chest and feeding her punches, the Mo grabbed the wedding dress and tore it right off. Didn't faze the bride, who kept throwing punches, tits flapping in the breeze. Then, when the bride was pulled off her friend, she stormed back into the wedding hall, raging about how her maid of honor ruined the wedding. People kept running around her, trying to cover her up. She'd sit down and her husband would throw his suit jacket over her. But then she'd pop up like James Brown, throw the jacket off, and resume her topless walk of rage. So the worst thing I've seen at a wedding, my cousin's boobs. Story 52. I worked at a banquet hall for a bit. One time, someone was changing their baby's diaper right in the middle of the table while everyone was eating. Nobody else at the table seemed too fazed by this, but I thought it was vile. While cleaning up after, we discovered the unwrapped diapers had been tossed under the table. Poop side down, left a nice shit stain on the carpet. Story 53. Bride's friend played cello while everyone was getting seated. She clearly was new to the instrument and constantly hit neck hair curling screeches. She then knocked over the sheet music, picked it up out of order, then proceeded to play as if they were in the correct order. Each page lead to a new section of a potentially different song. Music came on for the groom's walk, then dead silence for the bride who walked in from side stage instead of down the aisle. That night I played video games with the groom, because the bride went on her bachelorette party. Story 54. I missed my little sister's aisle and vows because I was in the parking lot, physically restraining my estranged biomom, who was explicitly told not to come to keep her from interrupting. Then got yelled at for missing said event, explained what happened, got thanked and cried on by little sister. Then drank too much, but not too much. Story 55. I was at a wedding reception that easily had 300 plus guests. Each table had a centerpiece with a live betta fish in it. When the lights came on and the wedding party had left, the mother of the bride was begging the kitchen staff for storage containers because they had like 100 fish and no plan for what to do with them after. I was gobsmacked. I also went home with approximately 20 fish. Story 56. I haven't had the most eventful life in terms of crazy stuff, but during one of my cousin's wedding, they planned to have the ceremony outside, but it started raining. The bride had an epic meltdown, even though the wedding planner had prepared for it, and there was a giant tent for the ceremony, yelling and screaming about how nothing she does ever works and everything is terrible. A thrown glass or two. Makes me glad we let our wedding be simple and fun, instead of a monstrously complicated event where everything has to go perfectly. Great food, great guests, a good photographer, and drinks are all you need. Story 57. Outdoor wedding. Just after heavy rain. Bride was a police officer. Groom was farmer, right out of college. Buzzards circling overhead. Like 5 of them. Groom's ex-GF was the DJ. Bride did keg. Stands in her wedding gown. Then proceeded to pass out in a wet drainage ditch. Groom's mother took her 4WD truck and was throwing rooster tails of mud in the back pasture like 50 Cs from the altar. Illegal substances and some vomit left scattered across the venue after. It was a mix of cops and hillbillies. The most surreal experience ever. It was FKN's rad. Story 58. My now ex-husband asked during our vows if I could smell alcohol on his breath. Another good one was my ex-husband was raised by his grandmother. Didn't even see his mom for 10 years as she was in and out of prison. She was at our wedding. During mother-son dance, his mom interrupted his grandmother dancing with him so the 3 of them could dance. I initiated a divorce 18 months later for many reasons. Story 59. It was my own wedding. My now ex-husband and I agreed we would not cake smash. I gave him his bite, and he proceeded to smash an entire handful of cake into my face. To top it all off, he then decided to rub salt into the wound of betrayal by smearing it around into my hair, down my neck, and into my vintage 1960s wedding dress. The silence in the reception was deafening as I stood there in absolute shock, then fled to the bathroom to bawl my eyes out and do my best to wash myself and my dress in the sink. Yeah, he's an ex for a reason. Although it took 13 years to come to my senses and leave him for good, it was not a happy marriage. But fundamentalist Christianity makes you stay longer than you should. Story 60. The bride and groom both met at a Catholic university. The groom was incredibly nice, but came from a pretty rough family. His side all arrived at the wedding, dressed in jeans and 2-piece halter top dresses, while the bride's family all wore typical wedding attire, suits, etc., it was well known among our group that the bride had been saving herself for marriage. During the speeches at the reception, the father of the groom starts rambling about the families coming together, tells a few drinking jokes, but then out of nowhere pulls a walker, like the kind an old person uses, out from behind a curtain on the stage, and starts going on about how, after that night, the bride was going to need the walker to get around, and then heavily insinuates, in case people weren't making connections, that it was because she was going to be having a rough night with his son. His table erupts in laughter. Everyone else is frozen. Our table of 20-somethings are all looking at each other, wondering if we misheard. Story 61. I was at a wedding reception, and there was a fight between a couple drunk guys. Dude threw an empty beer bottle at the other guy and it missed. I just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it hit me in the back of the head. I never saw it coming. It didn't break or smash like you'd see in the movies. It just bounced off the back of my melon and landed on the floor, but it left a small goose egg on the back of my noggin. Story 62. Went to a wedding where the bride invited several ex-boyfriends without telling Groom or really anyone else. It would have been okay if they hadn't openly talked about dating said bride to everyone. Then she doubled down on inviting them to an understandably upset Groom, her family. Anyways, I ate as much as I could at the reception, as fast as I could. Story 63. After the speeches, there was a huge queue for the toilets, and you could hear audible moaning coming from inside. The hotel manager banged on the door until a disheveled girl I know opened with another guest behind her, protesting their innocence. The manager told her she had to leave the venue. "But we weren't doing anything," she said. He then busted out this classic line, "Then why are your knickers around your ankles?" Story 64. My cousin, C1, was getting married in his hometown located in the Black Hills of western South Dakota. His brother, C2, was his best man. C2 had gotten a woman he was hooking up with pregnant. C2, being the piece of garbage that he is, told her that he didn't want to be a father and wanted nothing to do with the baby if she decided to keep it. The 8-12-month-along pregnant woman showed up at C1's wedding reception, hammered drunk, chain-burning heaters, and wearing a wedding dress. She was letting everyone know that C2 was a piece of shit and a deadbeat. Eventually, one of my uncles asked her to leave. She of course laughed in his face and told him to go f*** himself. I've seen some surreal country shit in my day, but this one sticks out in my memory. Story 65. My uncle came to my wedding in a wheelchair, having spent the better part of a year in and out of the hospital with various medical ailments. He was quite frail, but, come to find out, determined to dance with my aunt, my mom's sister. After the usual ceremonies of the American wedding reception, our DJ opened up the dance floor. One of the first songs happens to be a ballad, and multiple couples arrive to the floor. My uncle rolls up to the dance floor. He stands. My aunt takes his shoulders. He takes her hips. She's had a couple glasses of wine. He becomes unbalanced. She tries to steady them both. They trip over the wheelchair footrests, apparently having forgotten to step beyond that point. Down they both go. He broke his hip and went to the hospital. I spent all night awake, certain my wedding causes the demise of my uncle. The wedding was in 2021. Thankfully, he's still around. Phew. Story 66. A bride's aunt honked her horn to stop an outdoor wedding because she was late to the ceremony. She saw the wedding about to start, and she was late because she stopped at McDonald's. She proceeded to walk behind the bride down the aisle with her bag and sat in the front row. She then ate her food during the ceremony while mocking the bride's mother. She then continued to mock the bride's mother during the reception with the father of the bride and his current wife. The groom's family noticed and asked them to stop, and they laughed. During the reception, the bride's father and his wife left to watch a movie. They came back and said the movie wasn't that good, so they could have stayed. Story 67. At a childhood friend's wedding, another childhood friend, her brother's best friend, who has had some struggles over the years, was using drugs in the bathroom. My boyfriend saw, and as he came out to tell me, I look over to see him reach over the bar to drag the bartender who had refused to serve him. Within 30 seconds, the entire groom's family had descending on the guy, resulting in a massive 40-person brawl that spilled out into the lobby of the catering hall. The bride's brother was punched in the face by a groomsman and had to be taken away by ambulance. The friend fled the party and was arrested at home. Story 68. I grew up in Los Angeles. My brother's friend Bill, a Russian guy right out of high school, brought a girl over from the old country to marry. He was a stone alcoholic and passed out during the reception, which was held in somebody's backyard. Everybody there was drunk, and the wife tried to hit on me by grabbing my crotch. I pushed her away and said, "No thanks," because the groom was my friend. Later, she was on her knees in the garage, giving a line of guys' head in her white wedding dress. I got the fuck out of there. It was not enticing at all. It was fucking depressing. When I think about it, I still get a little sick to my stomach. Story 69. As we were eating dinner during the reception, the bridesmaids and groomsmen all scattered among the guests to sell 50-50 tickets. The reception became a straight-up fundraiser for the newlyweds. The winner of the 50-50 was guilted into giving their half, almost $2,000, to the bride and groom. Then they had a dollar dance. The bride and groom had already been together for years and had a home together, so their invitations requested cash instead of gifts. I'm guessing it was a profitable night for them. They divorced within a year. Story 70. I don't know if this counts. One of my not really close mates met his wife on Tinder. Great for them, no issues. But they are super in your face about overly proud they met on Tinder or something. If I were to guess, I think they are embarrassed or insecure or something. Or maybe they are just excited. Anyways, at their wedding, their vows were Tinder-specific about swiping right on her heart and on a future together, and left on hookup culture. How she is his Tinderella, blah blah blah. Once they did their vows and everyone clapped, the bride then did a "but wait, there's more," and lifted her dress midriff part up. Dress was 2 parts, and she had painted her belly into a kinder surprise. Tinder surprise, actually. And announced they were pregnant. That's the worst thing I've seen. Story 71. My cousin's boyfriend, 40-ish Irish guy, as in actually born in Ireland, a likely pathological liar, who brags, lies about association to the IRA, and came to America to avoid detection, loudly shouted that, "In Ireland, we get drunk and fight at weddings." At my own wedding, he got super drunk, went into the men's room, and tried to fight my sweet, elderly uncle and a developmentally disabled person. He and my cousin broke up, and a few years later, he died. Not sure how he died, but I may have had a celebratory Guinness and Jameson shot. Story 72. One of the bridesmaids tripped on her dress and fell off a staircase. She was bleeding from the head and clearly badly concussed, and we had to drop everything and call an ambulance. She was fine in the end, and is doing well now. But goddamn, that was terrifying. There was so much blood, and I was only like 12, so I was fully convinced she was going to die right then and there. Story 73. There was a skinny guy on a leash with a purple 3-piece suit. Another guy held the chain to said, "Leash." They're both in sunglasses. All throughout the ceremony, the guy on the leash barked loudly. The bride's 17-year-old son approached the 2 men. The very large guy holding the leash punched the kid and somehow broke his collarbone. This erupted into a complete all-out brawl of about 300 people stuffed into the atrium of a Holiday Inn. A gaggle of cops rushed in with batons soon after it started. They cancelled the reception and wasted at least $10K on the ballroom, catering, and DJ. I still remember seeing trails of blood through the hallways that night. Story 74. Went to a wedding where I barely knew the groom. Right before the wedding, all of the wedding party tried to talk him out of marrying his fiancée. He became enraged and ended up in a fist fight with the best man. The best man and the groomsmen left. I was pulled out of the crowd to be the best man. I was able to get the tuxedo from the former best man, but it didn't fit well. I did the best I could. I actually never saw the groom again after the wedding, and that was years ago. Story 75. A cake smash so bad the bride had it up to her ears, and she did the father-daughter dance with her head buried in her dad's shoulder, sobbing. Now the groom did have a bit of an alcohol issue, and was an awkward guy at the time in his 20s. However, he quit drinking. They are still married some 40 years later and have a lovely family of 2 daughters and several grandchildren, so it didn't deter them. Story 76. I drove the groom's car from the church to the reception as they were in a limo. The bride's cousin asked for the keys so she could move the car. Turns out she and her dipshit siblings did a bunch of typical childish things to the car, like turn the radio all the way up, wipers on high, etc., as a prank. She also dumped some of the birdseed into the vents and left the fan on high. So, after a nice wedding, the groom started his car, and his wife got her cornea scratched very badly by birdseed that was meant to bring them luck. Halfway to their honeymoon destination, they would up stopping at an emergency room, where they spent the night. Never trust a drunk redneck. Story 77. A lesbian couple decided to have a surprise wedding, invited friends and family for a casual dinner, which was actually a pretty elaborate ceremony. Most of their friends seemed to be aware what was happening, but the family members certainly weren't. One of the mothers, a nurse, came straight from work still wearing her scrubs. From what I understand, she tried to cancel, but the brides insisted she must at least stop by the restaurant on her way home. Imagine this woman's shock when she saw 100 people dressed to the nines and her daughter in a wedding dress. Poor lady went through all the stages of grief right in front of our eyes. It wasn't even that her daughter was marrying a woman, she just felt so humiliated. Story 78. The bride and groom wanted to do the thing where they sit in chairs, and everyone lifts them up dancing around, despite neither of them being Jewish. They, people lifting the bride, dropped her pretty hard. Also, they did like an hour-long montage of pictures of them together, and individually, including baby pictures before they served dinner. The whole thing started at like 3 p.m., and they didn't start serving food until 8 p.m. Story 79. Bride's brother was drunk as fuck during the pre-dinner hour, where people were giving extemporaneous speeches about the couple. He starts off saying some very confused drunk guy rambling for about 45 seconds, and then drops, because she was such a bitch when she was younger. You could have heard a pin drop, and someone promptly hustled the mic out of his hands. After the wedding, he was too drunk to hop on the gondola that took you down the mountainside. The venue was going to out him in a car and drive him down instead, but he tore off on foot, drunk as f***, forcing the venue employees to split up and drive down the mountain to try and find him in the pitch-black woods. Story 80. My second cousin's wedding was the ceremony after they had a court wedding during COVID. They'd been married 1 year. Ceremony starts with the preacher, my cousin father-in-law, officiating. During his speech, he goes on and on about how the family shouldn't be involved in the marriage of their children, and running to their parents when they have an argument wasn't the way marriages should work. Then he proceeded to marry them. Very awkward cringe. Then at the start of the dancing, after they had their first dance, the groom, the person my cousin was marrying, had a long choreographed dance with his mother. Multiple songs. Very long. They sat my cousin in front of them as if it was a gift to her. Separated not even a year later. Story 81. The bride's sister, who was one of the bridesmaids, refused to walk down the aisle with the groom's nephew. She was in her 20s. He was between 7 to 10. She screamed at the bride, stomped her feet, yelled at the nephew and the bridal party when they intervened. Then she packed up herself, her husband, and her kid, and left 2 HERs before the wedding. The grandmother demanded that the bride apologize to her sister. Such a shitty family. Wedding was a lot of fun after that, though. Story 82. I ate pasta salad in a church basement for a 16 and 17-year-old that wasn't pregnant, as she had a baby a year later. No music, no dancing, and someone gifted her a laundry basket full of cleaning supplies. A Thursday night in early January. She was the niece of my husband's friend. It was bizarre. No idea if they're still married. Story 83. During the photo shoot on a farm, the bride walked through fire ants. Her wedding dressing had 100 fluffy layers in it. She ended up spending most of the afternoon in an ice bath crying, while a dozen different family members worked on getting the ants out of the dress. At another wedding, the groom got super angry and stormed off from the reception because the family played a prank on him by blindfolding him and having him hunt for the bride's garter under her dress. Except it was her brother wearing the dress. Everyone was cackling until he took off the blindfold and started throwing chairs around. Story 84. The groom admitted to being raped by his new wife. He said that when they first started dating, he wanted to wait to have sex because he really liked her and didn't want things to progress too quickly. But then he fell asleep one night and woke up to her riding him. Everyone thought this was funny for some reason, but I was like, WTF man, you're a victim. Story 85. Too many to count. The groom passing out multiple times, being that last table that got zero food, an impromptu, interpretive dance that left guests asking who ordered the stripper, but the most disgusting was a guest catching the bouquet and her date screaming, "Oh no!" Dear sister, that is your cue to leave his ass. Story 86. And not one I have personally seen, but losing a bridesmaid to a photo op is one of the most horrifying that I've read about. I think it was for a Facebook photo or something, and they climbed over the guardrail at a canyon. Wow. I just tried to pull up a news article about this, and I cannot believe how many horror stories there are about brides, grooms, bridal party members falling to their deaths on the wedding day. Jeez.